Welcome everyone to the Captive Audience. I'm Kevin Hoare. I am your host. We're recording this show, but you're going to see a fabulous show because we are very fortunate tonight to have with us Kevin Dahlgren, who is just one of the supreme individuals in talking about and exposing and helping all of us understand what's been going on with one of the issues, the biggest issue of our time, which is really a combination of issues: homelessness, as it's often described, but also drug and alcohol addiction, mental illness, and what's happening on our streets and how it's interwoven with the livability of our cities and the crime that is obviously associated with it too. And he goes out there and shows it to us like no one else does, and it's honest reporting. So Kevin, thank you for being here tonight.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. I'm a big fan of your work, and it's honestly an honor for me to be on the show. So thank you.
Well, and it's been a couple of years. Can you believe it? I mean, I know a lot happened over 2 years, but at the same time, it just seems like it was yesterday that we were sitting here.
Yeah, seriously. Time flies, but I'm happy to be on again, and I'm looking forward to talking.
And so, why don't you tell folks all of the things that you kind of cover? And I will post while you're talking about that. I will make sure that folks get the Substack that you publish on, and also your Twitter, your X. .com feed, which is a great place to go and kind of stay on top of what you're doing. But why don't you give us a little overview of the things that you cover and report on?
Sure. Well, I'm a independent journalist. I live in Portland, Oregon. I primarily cover homelessness, addiction, crime. I talk about the homeless industrial complex. Really, I dig deep into the dysfunctional social service system. The reason why I talk about this is because I worked in that system for about 28 years in the Multnomah County area, so I know it well. And a lot of the people that are still running the show, I used to work with. So I kind of know how they think, I know how the process works. It's really become a very highly profitable industry, unfortunately. And it just over time became this industry. At one point, it was a cause. I kind of felt that way in the early 90s, like, hey, we're all out here making a difference and we really cared about fixing things. And then this sort of shift happened, and all of a sudden, shelters exploded, uh, budgets exploded, everything exploded. And it just went from millions to billions. And at this point, there's really no motivation for them to end this crisis, because if they do, they're out of a job.
Yeah.
And I try to talk more about that the very people we pay to end this crisis are the very people that benefit from this crisis.
Yeah,
And what's scary about
we think we're paying them to end it. They don't.
and
They don't.
some of it is subconscious. It's like, do you really want to work yourself out of a job? Right? It's like I don't really think there's a lot of truly evil people that are like, ha ha ha, let's benefit, but there's really no motivation to truly ending the crisis. And I haven't seen that in years, and that's really frustrating and disappointing. I'm a big believer, especially if you work in social services, you should wake up every day believing, what can I do today to eventually work myself out of a job? I do not believe this is supposed to be a career. This is a crisis, and crises end, they get fixed. I truly believe that. And so
Yeah.
that's what that's where I'm very critical when I see the same paycheck players clocking in and out every single day and not really making any difference whatsoever. I'm like, well, then what's the point of all of this? What are you doing? How are you improving the world? What's the measurable results you are doing? How are you helping this person? And when I
Yeah.
mean help, I don't mean a bottle of water and good morning. I mean, what have you done to fundamentally change this person's life, help them overcome certain barriers that led them to the streets or kept them on the streets, to help them once and for all, once again, become self sufficient? That should be the ultimate goal of every single homeless person we work with. And the fact is, it's rare to see that. And usually the only times you see it are with the volunteers and some of the faith based programs that are a little more hardcore, saying, we're going to help you, but we're going to fix you and we're going to be tough love all the way.
Tough love.
And you
Yeah.
know what? if people embrace that model, meaning the clients, they usually do very, very well. But when you're on the streets in this current social service system, especially on, like, just say the West Coast, there's a lot of enabling, and it's a lot of enabling that becomes dependency. And there's really no motivation anymore to leave the streets because you're just simply taken care of. They've made it so easy. There's no motivation. Like, why would you want to do that if you get delivered to you food and supplies every day, and it's a lawlessness community, and it's a free for all drug culture, and you can just kind of do whatever you want.
Bodily
That doesn't,
autonomy, I think you
yeah,
called it. Yeah.
yeah. Now that's personally not appealing to me. I like to work, I like to have responsibility, but it's appealing to these certain types of people. And it is called bodily autonomy. It's a progressive philosophy where a person has a right to do what they want without any sort of restrictions, use what they want, do what they feel, sex trade, drug use, drug dealing, just whatever. And I've always believed there should be limits to what we're allowed and can do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm in some ways a libertarian at heart, where I do believe in small government, but this is also a society, which means there has to be rules. There has to be certain lines we just can't cross for the
Yeah.
greater good of our society.
I
And
think they call it
unfortunately,
I think they call it ordered liberty, which is
yeah,
it's not disordered liberty. It's liberty, but as you said, with rules, and it's also the government that is constituted by the people is there to protect other people from having their rights infringed. And I think that's what's gotten a lot of people's attention, right?
mhm,
Because it's do whatever you want with no consequences for what it's causing the rest of society to experience with the livability of their neighborhoods, with the crime that inevitably results. And that's definitely got people's attention because somebody once explained to me that um, fentanyl and meth are different. Heroin, heroin, people went inside a house. People could actually, be functional. It wasn't good for them, but they could do heroin inside a house, and you wouldn't really even know they were there. And they could continue that habit for a while. And this is somebody in a neighborhood in Eugene called the Whitaker. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And they said what changed is when meth came along and fentanyl, people started wandering around outside all the time, all over the neighborhood, and then they would act out, and it would be um, uh, meth. They could get kind of violent sometimes. Fentanyl, they just got really drowsy and tired and started behaving, falling asleep on the streets and
yep,
defecating and urinating and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, but they noticed that their neighborhood, which they liked at one point, it wasn't really terrifically impacted by people that were using drugs. Suddenly that changed and they didn't feel the same way about it anymore. And this is a person who I would say was as probably close to being very liberal progressive as you can get, and they're tired of it.
yep. Well, the reason why is they're both highly addictive. And when you have a highly addictive substance, it creates this desperation in the person where they need to get their next fix. So it's no longer functional user. After they do it, the only thing on their mind is, where do I get to do it again? Because they are terrified of the withdrawal. And this is primarily fentanyl. And it's important to know that fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, 50 times more potent, right? Which
Mhm.
means a couple grains on the nose of a Lincoln penny can kill an adult male, right? It's extremely strong, right?
Uh,
And that means the withdrawals are horrific. I've seen them, right? And I see it downtown almost every day, and they're just desperate. And when they're desperate, they're willing to do anything: lie, cheat, and steal from your best friend, breaking into businesses, stealing, hurting others, pickpocketing, robbing. They are desperate, desperate, desperate. And it's scary to see it out there, right? Because all they care about is they don't want to experience that pain of withdrawal. So they need to keep doing it. And that's the problem, you know. And it's funny, it's weird to talk about heroin as not as bad.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, it's not good for you. Lots of people have
like
died from it, but
it's it's surreal. I wish I could like tell my 20-year-old self about this right now. Like the fact that I'm even talking about this, where now in a weird, strange way, it makes you miss heroin
the good old
based
days. Yeah.
on what fentanyl has now done. Now I
Yeah.
heard word on the street is there's a new tweak to the fentanyl chemistry, and it's 10 times stronger than fentanyl.
If-
And so we're seeing that now. I haven't seen it in Portland yet. I haven't even heard about it, but I've heard reports about it in other cities, which means it's coming. And that's really scary, right?
Yeah.
So this is what we're dealing with here is a legit crisis. I see a person almost or die about every other day on the streets, right? Almost that we are able to save them, we Narcan them, or I witness the Narcan, whatever, or we try everything and they die. And it's so common. It's like just everywhere. Just today, I didn't witness the stabbing, but I heard the stabbing. I heard the argument, and then I heard the police cars, and I saw the guy in the back of the car, and he had just stabbed another homeless man right in the back, and it just happened about a block from me. And it's so common that people barely even looked in that direction. It was more like indifferent, like, oh, look, sirens, whatever. And it's just part of the reality of the streets now. But it's so chaotic out there. It's one of the reasons I feel so strongly doing this work is I feel it's so important to document and share the reality of the streets, because you can't solve a problem until you understand the problem or even accept the problem.
Yeah.
Meaning, don't close your eyes and just like, I don't want to know. This is the reality. This is what's really going on. And this is affecting everybody, right? Not just the individual, but look what it's doing to the neighborhood, to the businesses, to the homeowners. It's affecting everybody. So to solve a problem, you have to understand a problem. And what I believe I'm doing is really kind of a cause is to raise that awareness. And it's at times a very uncomfortable truth. People don't always like when I criticize the city, but it's not. If you actually watch me, I rarely actually directly criticize the city. I might just criticize policy, or I might say this is what's going on today, right? There's a difference. I'm just laying out the facts and letting people decide on their own. And people are like, why do you always make it sound like it's so bad? I'm like, well, because it is. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it
You're
is.
not sugarcoating it. And also, the most dangerous thing to people who might be vested in the current way things are is the truth. Because
Yeah.
you mentioned that I think there's two groups that are addicted to the current situation. One are the addicts who, as you said, just get handled bottles of water, granola bars, a tent. They can just keep doing it. There's no consequence. But then it's also the people who have found it quite a nice little gig to be going and handing things to these folks. And they kind of buy in, don't they, to the
Mhm.
ideology that says, well, we're not here to fix them. They have to decide when they want to do that, right? Which is
Yeah,
sickening,
that bothers me. I mean, I sort of get it. I mean, people need to be ready for change, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't make every effort a majority of the time. I mean, especially if you built that kind of rapport with them and they know you by name and you do show up once a week to hand them stuff, remember their story, remember their family, how they ended up on the streets, what's their addiction, are they working on recovery, do they need a shelter? I mean, really make that effort, not just wait for them to miraculously come around. I mean, it's important to note that 95% of the people out there lack rational thinking and or critical thinking and rational thought, right? They're not really going to just out of the blue say, hey, I really need some help. It's rare. It happens, but it's rare.
it's
But
rare.
what
But
you
you
know,
have to
but
be there when that moment happens, and you have to be shopping it to them. I've
and
seen some of your
and
videos where that's part of it.
yeah, and uh there's a lot of ambivalence on the street. So being there, that's also difficult. Here's ambivalence. Ambivalence is this: yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you never know when you're going to catch them at that exact moment where they're like, I want help, or never mind. And so the moment they're like, hey, you know what? I think I need change. I need something new in my life. You better be prepared to help them. And the problem is I rarely find people out there who actually have the resources and the training to help these individuals. Again, I do this as a volunteer. I'm an independent journalist, right? I'm not paid by anybody. I'm out there every day reporting on the truth, and I do the best I can. I mean, uh, whether I like it or not, and it feels good to help. I 30% of the time have become a case manager because I just know them well enough where it's like I'm the one giving them the ride or taking them here or calling their family. I spend easily over $1,000 a month on the homeless, right? Just little things, just to kind of build that rapport and help them. And I do this because a lot of times they are in a desperate situation, and it's not like I'm rich. But the thing is, when you're out there immersing yourselves, you also just try to do everything you can to help them. I'm very careful not to enable, and they know that very well. But
Right.
they also know that I'm out there to document, and they're generally pretty okay with it. That they know that I'm filming and that I'm interviewing, and that I sometimes have to talk about difficult subjects. But they appreciate that I'm sharing the reality of the streets, even if sometimes it makes them look bad, because they also generally know maybe I shouldn't be doing this,
They
right?
kind of have a self-awareness to that
And
point, like, yeah, I
and
probably shouldn't be smoking this fentanyl, but
well, and I'm not shy. If you see my videos, I will sometimes directly say, why are you doing this?
oh yeah,
Or sometimes I have to stop them because I really don't want to smell it. I'm not really at risk of getting, contact high, but it's also fentanyl specifically. It's just a horrific smell.
yeah,
Really can just make you sick. I mean, it's just like a deadly chemical, and it's just like yikes. And I've breathed it in many times, right? And it's scary. I'm very careful about not getting actual contact because that's scary. I always carry Narcan with me in one of my pockets just in case someone needs it or I need it,
yeah,
right? Tara, my photographer friend, told me the other day that she had contact. She got contact and she felt it. And I'm not surprised because you're around it all the time. And all it takes is one slip up where you're just like, do, do, do,
yeah.
or
Oh, you
scratch,
forget, you forget, and just touch your face. Yeah,
yeah. And so you have to be really careful. So I try to be very mindful about what I touch at all times because you just don't know. You do little things like you never leave your drink unattended,
unattended.
and either by accident or deliberate, people sometimes try to hotshot you. And a hotshot is where someone gives you a deliberate, deadly dose of a drug. And it's a very common way to kill another person on the streets in the most common way. It's not stabbing, shooting, strangulation, pushing off a bridge. It's hot shot. And you know why? Because it's very easy to get away with
Oh
because
yeah,
9 times out of 10, the investigation will determine this was an accidental overdose.
yeah,
So
because
if
it's
they're an
almost
addict anyway, and then you give someone a high enough dose to kill them, you can't even prove it otherwise.
yeah.
It's
You
like it's
literally
almost
almost
impossible.
have to have video of them doing it while
Yeah.
they're doing it, and that's
And
not common.
it's very common practice on the streets. Very common. The fact
Yeah,
is, fentanyl is so cheap. The fact is, if someone wants to off someone, sadly, it's generally speaking very easy.
so
And with all this sort of infighting and soap opera drama stuff out there, when someone dies, I'm always thinking, I wonder. I wonder if this was accidental because you don't know.
yeah, and the cops
And
can't sort out an argument
no,
between 2 drug addicts that where, they just can't. It's, like, impossible. It's not like a
my
typical domestic disturbance.
yeah, my first experience with learning what a hot shot was is when I worked at a men's homeless shelter about 20 years ago. And we found one of our homeless clients, a young guy around 18 or 19, with a couple heroin needles in his leg, right? And the most unusual thing was we knew he was clean and sober and was anti drug and was very religious and absolutely hated drugs. And it just so happens the night before he had pissed off one of the main homeless guys who didn't mess around and had a history of hurting people and basically said, we're going to take care of you. And literally a day later, he was dead in a bush. And to this day, I am so sure that it was a hot shot because
Yeah.
it just was strange, the placement of the needles, and that because there was so many, and it made just no sense whatsoever. There was no way this kid did this.
Yeah.
And that's when I really blew my mind that that's actually what happened. And I don't blame the cops because all they found was a guy with needles.
Yeah.
And we did mention, well, he was going through a lot of drama and stuff, but unless the person actually admits it, how can you prove otherwise? So what I'm saying is that it's a very common practice, sadly, and it's just sort of street justice.
Yeah.
And street justice normally is applied to if a person is kind of really asking for it, like if they commit a pretty heinous crime. The strict rule in the streets is never call the police. You will never, almost ever, hear of a homeless person calling the cops because if they do, they're the ones that are going to get beat up or killed, even if they're the victim. But their friends will take care of it for you, especially if it's like, say, a sexual assault or even sometimes just theft. It's called street justice, but also street justice kind of applies to, I don't like you, I'm going to take care of you,
Well,
and it's a crazy thing.
and I think everybody kind of has a sense, and there are places you can live where you aren't that far away from this stuff, but you don't see it and don't experience it. So there's a lot of folks. That's why your journalism is so important. There's a lot of folks that can imagine in their minds that it really isn't like this, even though it's this roiling,
Mhm.
horrific, um, law of the street. People just skanking around, living these weird lives, doing drugs, and being handed the resources to continue doing it. And
Yeah.
in a way, I almost don't blame the people who are doing it, even though everybody's ultimately accountable for their actions at some level. But the people who are enabling it, that's a
Mhm.
different level of accountability. Those are the people who should know better. And there are there are constant battles. I bore witness to one in Eugene recently where there's uh it's the River Road Navigation Center, and it was opened up a few years ago, and it's just turned into this massive blight in the community because it's a
Mhm.
low threshold facility, and it's not really focused on getting people off of the drugs, and it doesn't take any responsibility for the impact it's having on the neighborhood. So all these businesses are going under, and it's not far from a school, and the community just said, that's it, we've had it with this. We weren't thrilled about it when it came a few years ago, but now this is actually facilitating the problem and creating almost like a flop house for people to just sit around and do drugs all the time. And that it is now dangerous for people to go to the shops that they've gone to for decades right next door.
Well, I 100% agree with you, Kevin. I'm a big believer in accountability, but also oftentimes with my work, as I like to say, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
Meaning, I'm more likely to blame the system that's created a situation where these people feel like they can do this, or lower level staff that do this a certain way because this is the way they were trained.
Yeah.
So I'm very big on blaming the system because if you fix the system, you fix the person. I've always believed that. You don't work from bottom up, you work from top down. Fix the system, fix the person,
Yeah.
right? If you stop enabling and you start empowering, it's going to happen naturally. You're going to see this improvement, right? You can do it individually, yes, but I'm always thinking about what can we do at the highest levels. How can we maybe fund certain programs that are actually making a difference, hold other ones accountable that are not, add more oversight, and really just work on an actual solution that will hopefully work ourselves out of a job.
Yeah. Which there will be plenty of jobs later for all the folks that have gone into recovery and then need to get back to regular lives, or maybe I think there aren't there some people that are probably pretty severely damaged by some of this drug use, and there's going to be ongoing,
Of course,
care.
look, not everybody will be self-sufficient. There's no way that is even possible from what I see. There's going to be that percent. There's that 15% that are so far gone, they're going to need care the rest of their lives, right? And they should get that safety net. They should be taken care of, right? It's a tragedy that we see them on the streets. They're the ones that are usually completely naked, running around, talking crazy in the middle of the street, and everyone just ignores them, sadly.
Yeah.
We should help them. But there's this higher percent that absolutely are just, run amok and do whatever they want because they can. And they need structure, they need responsibility, they need to be held accountable for them. It's just tough love. And everyone's like, oh, I can't believe you said that. That's so mean. I'm like, do you forget that the word love is in tough love? Do you know
Yeah.
what love means?
Yeah.
Like it's all they hear is tough and how dare Kevin. I'm like, okay, it's like when you raise a child, you can't always be their friend. You have to be their guardian. You have to teach them right from wrong, which means sometimes it's okay to ground them and being like, do this, but don't do this. And then if they turn out to be a high function adult, it's because of the rules. It's because of the responsibility and the strict nature. Because you
Yeah.
can be strict but loving at the same time, right?
Yep.
And I kind of think we should apply that, especially to the streets where these are a lot of people with a lot of like arrested development type issues and never really had the structure. And honestly, I'm more often than not very sympathetic to the people out there because I know their history. They had screwed up households, a lot of abuse, no structure. I mean, where do you expect them to be, right? And I
Yep.
get frustrated sometimes when people say like they just need to pull up their pants and get a job. I'm like, well, it's more complicated than that. This person went through something you can never imagine when they were 10 years old, right? And I certainly agree there should be some responsibility, but what they need also is intensive support, and that's something they probably never got. And
Yeah.
so, in my experience, a high percentage of the addicts out on the streets have severe childhood trauma. We see that. Now, I'm not justifying their behavior, I'm just explaining, and it makes kind of sense why they use what they use. They're trying to numb things out, right? Whether people like to hear it or not, I've met very few people who just simply love being high, right?
Hmm.
Now, there's a difference. Being high feels good, being drunk feels good. That's dopamine, but doesn't mean you have to like it. You can feel good about it, but doesn't mean you like it. There's a difference, right?
Uh,
Because
yeah.
of the numbing. So it's like, ooh, that feels good, but there's always that something in the back of your head or your heart being like, oh man, I hate doing this. Hate it, hate it, hate it. And so that's important to note, to just because doing something makes you feel good, it doesn't always make you feel right about doing it. There's a big difference. And so I try to remind people that with addiction, that it's rare that I find someone who's just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done in my life, right? And you find them, of course. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, most people in the middle of their addiction they're generally pretty unhappy people.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned about how there's, just the low threshold, giving Narcaning them and giving them water and a granola bar and a tent and all this stuff. All that isn't the stuff that gets them into recovery. It's the all the other stuff. And yet in Oregon, in Portland in particular, I don't know if it's changed much in the last 2 years, but what I had learned in recent years is we're not good at the recovery stuff. We don't actually
No.
offer that. And I know that sometimes it's because, isn't it, there a direct conflict between the low threshold and the higher threshold stuff philosophically, and some people don't like the higher threshold stuff because they just want to like give them stuff and make them feel comfortable. But it's terrible because what they should be doing, and they have all the, you mentioned billions of dollars. Clearly, billions of dollars are not really in a state that's near the bottom in the country going into actually helping
Yep.
them recover.
Well, it is absolutely philosophy. It is absolutely an ideology. That is what's stopping us from solving this. It comes down to political will. It comes down to thinking differently about the problem. And this is the problem is, there's such a philosophical difference to the approach towards recovery. And this is why nothing ever changes. because, more than half, well, a high percentage of people that work in social services strongly believe in bodily autonomy, do not believe in rules, believe that the person is really no more than a victim of capitalism, and therefore it's not their fault that they're an addict, not
Yeah.
their fault that they're out there breaking the law. All of it can be sort of explained because of capitalism, which I just think is insane. Um, and even if that's an argument you want to have, great. Can we solve the crisis first, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
can we all just sit around and talk about it? Because then that would be interesting, right? I'd love to be at a round table and debate this, but today isn't the day to debate this. Today is the day to solve it. It's like when you're in a park and you hear a man screaming for help, you run to a lake and you see him drowning. Now, if you're the homeless industrial complex, you immediately go home and do a study on why he's in the lake, right? You don't pull him out of the lake and save him. They do a 6-month study, $2 million of, was he pushed? Did he jump in, or did he fall? Right? That's what they need to determine before they save the next person. Any normal person would be like, oh my God, somebody is drowning. Let's save him right now. And then determine the root causes
Yeah.
or what actually happened. That's the difference. That's the ideological difference. The left are always obsessed with these studies of like why, rather than just like doing it, right? Basically, they're all theory and no practice. Right? And that's infuriating to me, because it's like, look, I like theory, but when it comes to a person I'm seeing people die every day, maybe we should do a little more practice and be a little more proactive and
Yeah.
just find a way to solve this immediately. And if we even had some kind of FEMA type response, we could almost entirely end homelessness within a week,
Yeah.
as long as local governments played along and basically says, yes, we agree to this, and yes, we're going to enforce this, but we're going to let them go here, and we're going to actively work with them. It's amazing what we could do with political will, but that's a problem. Another reason we haven't solved this crisis, because locally speaking, nobody is ever actually in charge. I want you to think about this. You have the county, the city, nonprofit,
Uh,
for profit, state. They're all doing little things, but nobody's in charge of anybody. So, for example, how you yell at the governor, how dare you, homeless crisis. The governor will be like, well, I sent all this money to the county. It's the county's responsibility. So you go to the county and say, like, how dare you? And like, well, wait, we're funding these nonprofits. So you go to the nonprofits and be like, how dare you? The nonprofits say, well, if we had enough funding, we could have solved it. So then they go back to that. And it's just basically, and it's true, actually. If you think about it, there's no one at the top of the food chain. And that's why we haven't solved this. I've always believed we need a homeless czar. We need someone where the buck stops with this one person, like
real
like
power over the system.
with,
Yeah.
and it has to have power. They have to really say, this is how we're going to do this, because there's nobody in charge. And so, and by the way, no one also has really any authority over anybody else. And so everyone just does it their own way. And so that's what's so frustrating. And then you have the ugly little stepchild sitting at the small table, which is faith-based. They're oftentimes doing some of the best work, but they're never invited to the big kids table.
Yeah.
Because everyone's like, oh, faith-based, how wrong. We can't just shove Jesus down people's throat, right?
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating, because they actually do really great work, and they probably have some of the highest success rates, but nobody really talks about it, right? And, I worked in a system for many years where there were strict rules. Even if I knew there was openings at like the Salvation Army, I wasn't allowed to tell the client that. I wasn't allowed to say there's openings, which now I did anyway, because I didn't really care. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them, but I'm not going to do it.
Doing the right thing is its own reward. Yes, exactly.
But I always just felt like, well, look, let them decide, right? But like, that was a weird, strict rule about never really get faith-based programs involved. And it always bothered me too. I mean, I'm a man of faith, and it always bothers me. It's like, look, whether you have faith or not, these are people who do good work. They don't get paid generally, right? And they're just killing it.
Yeah.
And I actually worked for the Salvation Army back in the day and had a good experience. So what I'm saying is, really, when you think about it, there's no one actually in charge. There just isn't. It's easy to blame, let the chair of the county or the governor or this executive director, but also there's no nonprofit that does everything. So you could blame them. Well, you dropped the ball and didn't pay the rent, and this happened. They'll say something like, well, they weren't on their mental health meds and that's their problem, or this is their fault. It's so easy to pass the buck. It is so easy. There's no accountability. I challenge anyone to name the time a nonprofit publicly said, we screwed up. This is our bad. They
Yeah,
don't do that. I've never even heard of that. I
yeah,
mean, name a governor who's done that. Like,
yeah,
you know how much respect I would have for Governor Kotek for her just to own up to it. Like, I just want people to be truthful. I want
yeah,
people to own up to like mistakes, and when they don't, it's just like, oh, it's so frustrating, right?
yeah.
So I just want people to realize this is why it's not getting done, because nobody's in charge, and that's insane. Because if we ran social services like a business, there would be a president. There
Yeah.
would be a vice president. There would be a board which oversees, right? And everything would work out, right? And the biggest fail ever of homelessness is when we politicized it. Homelessness became a political tool, primarily of the left, right?
Yeah. Which
They,
they can't talk to people about Jesus, but they can say that communism is awesome and
yeah.
capitalism is bad, which doesn't sound like a very good subject to be talking to people who are addicted about.
Yeah, and look, I do not believe politics has any place when it comes to homelessness or addiction. Keep it out. Don't talk about it. Everybody has good ideas. Hey, look, I appreciate their passion and their compassion. That's great. But you actually need to apply it in a way that's actually going to help them, not enable them until basically you're loving them to death, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also on the flip side, I also don't agree is like when people get really hardcore, just being like, let's just kick their butts off the street and force them to work 40 hours a week. I'm like, well, they're not capable. I mean, the thing is, everyone's different, and there's always these extremes, and it's always basically it's the carrot and the stick, right? And some communities are all carrot, which is enabling, all stick, meaning you don't get to be here. And by the way, neither one works, because if you're the stick, you just force it onto another community. And if
Yeah.
you're the carrot, you attract everybody from other communities. There needs to be that balance. Carrot and stick is another way of saying tough love, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
a little
Right.
bit of both. It's compassion, but it's accountability. That's how you end this crisis, is that delicate balance, you know? And when you're holding them accountable, it doesn't necessarily be you're being a jerk. You're just letting them know that there's certain lines you can't cross anymore, because this isn't helping you or anybody around you. That's all it is.
Well, I will tell you there's one other aspect of politics that doesn't even sound like politics, but it's what politicians do if you let them. And I think it might be enabled by the media. Um, it's not specific to homelessness. It's really literally anything that the government says it's supposed to be solving or think says it's solving, is that once they say they're going to build a homeless shelter, they show up, they do the ribbon cutting, they dig the first shovel in, they do the photo op, it gets good coverage, and then you never hear from them again. And if the thing never gets built, no one's ever held accountable. It's all they are satisfied with saying that they put a dollar figure next to something they care about, and that there was a kickoff for the project, and there was a press release, an immediate opportunity, and the media eats it up, says that it's happening, and then it's over. And that is one of the reasons why even the people who are in charge don't feel like they have to do very much to be in charge. The governor is certainly fairly powerful figure in the state of Oregon and could do a great many things
Yeah.
just with the executive power. Frankly, in some respects, more than, say, the president of the United States could, even though I think we're going to talk about what might be happening at that level too, because that's a source of a lot of money. But they get their reward. They get their political dopamine hit by just saying that they tried and dispensing some money
Yeah, they're
and doing photos.
the popular thing to do is, let's announce a state of emergency.
How many
Let's
of those have there been, like in Old
and
Town?
that is such a pet peeve of mine, because when I say there's an emergency, I treat it like one. When I say there's a crisis, I treat it like one. And so she did this like 2 years ago. I'm like, all right. So Lacey, state of emergency. I should see people out there every day actively working 24/7, right? She should have activated thousands of volunteers who, trust me, if they felt inspired, they would probably do this. They would actually you get volunteers come out there. A lot of people really care about their community, and I don't. It has not been treated like this. I was just in Salem actually a few days ago, and I went to Oregon's first or second largest homeless encampment, a 6-minute drive from the capital, and it's like legit third world. Like it's just shocking how bad it is. It was dangerous, and there was millions of pounds of trash and people lying around and overdosing and fighting, and it was just like, wow, that was just crazy. And I had been actually there a few years ago, and if anything, it's gotten worse. So state of emergency, my you know what, and that just is a major pet peeve of mine. Is shame on you for calling it that. That's
Yeah.
insulting. And you know why she can get away with this? Because voters don't really have great attention spans and will just like be happy with little bullet points and headlines, be like, yay, my money's going to help this. And then they go on other lives, right? And
Yeah.
why do you think we keep voting in these $1 million, $1 billion budgets over and over and over again? I mean, why have we had end homelessness in 10 years, 3 times in a row in Portland Metro,
Yeah.
right? How is it that we forgot what happened to the first 2 times, right? It's a joke. And the way we can get away with this is because, well, not we, but the system,
Right.
because voters do not have long-term memory about this stuff. They
don't.
maybe just don't care or they don't understand. And
Well,
that's
and
how they can get away with this.
And I think that's part of what you do is you actually create the basis for them to understand it. Because that's something they don't get. They don't get it from the regular. Some people in the regular media actually do some of this or get it, but very few of them. And they know that if they constantly showed people just dying in the streets of fentanyl all the time on the local news, they probably wouldn't keep their viewer base. I mean,
yeah, people don't want to see that. They want to see happy stories. They want to see success stories. And I think that's great. I've kind of made the decision recently to kind of balance my storytelling with positive stories.
mm-hmm.
Now, the challenge is finding the positive stories because I'm like, oh my God,
a lot of work.
I want one, but like I want to highlight good teams doing good work, but it's so hard and it's so frustrating. And I'm just like, you're killing me here. Like, I really do want to, I really want to show that there's good people do good things. Recently, I did this post and I basically did a shout out to volunteers because it's the volunteers who are actually doing more good out there than anybody. You know why? Because they're not restricted by the grants. They can basically do what they want.
Yeah.
And they're the ones killing it. They're the ones saying, yeah, I'll drive you. Yeah, I'll pay for this. I don't have to ask anybody to do anything. And they're generally really good at it. And I love that because they don't have any requirements and nothing's,
they just do the right thing. Down. They just do the right thing.
That's the homeless industrial complex absolutely hates volunteers because they make them look bad. Right. And I know there's a lot of good people that work in social services who just fully admit my hands are tied. I can't really get anything done. Right. And I've heard this so many times where I write, they strike me as someone who really cares, where they just sort of accept the fact that they're just doing this for a paycheck because they can't actually make a difference. And that they struggle with it. But what they don't struggle with is when they're making $80,000, $90,000 a year.
Then they feel a lot less.
Well, because, making a decent living feels good because then in your own world, you feel safe. Yeah. You got your rent, your mortgage covered, you get to eat good food. And, why would you want to give that up? So you see they become complacent because of the money. And the fact is money has become pretty decent in social services, especially in leadership roles, several $100,000, right? And by the way, everyone criticizes high pay. I don't if you deserve it. Yeah, if I knew of an executive director killing it and doing a great job, I wouldn't care if they made $250,000 a year if every day they were making a difference where they had a tangible plan to end this crisis in like 2 years. I would say, great, you deserve the money because it would
be money savings ultimately.
Yeah, right. You would save a ton. So I'm not anti six-figure salaries if you're doing a good job, right? But the problem is you can't prove. Now, I don't know if you know this, but in almost all grants of the local NGOs, it's specifically written in there that they will not allow oversight. No oversight of people who don't work with them, and basically people like me or you that's really going to be like, all right, did you get
No
the job done?
independent oversight, basically.
Independent oversight, even if that means six people with three people on each side of the aisle where they kind of fight it out, but they all have to kind of agree and there's a consensus. Was this money well spent or not? They don't do that. They don't believe in the oversight. And I do. I'm a big believer is because people often ask me, what would you do to end this crisis? Right? What would you do? What is step one? Well, first of all, we're not really going to like get rid of everybody and start over. That just seems unlikely. But what we can do immediately is to demand oversight, to find out once and for all where the money is going and how is it being spent and was it money well spent. And so what we would do is we'd find small, nimble programs making a great difference, and we'd want to give them more funding.
Yeah.
But then we find other programs doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. They don't deserve the money because, sorry, folks, this is not making any difference whatsoever. So
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the oversight. Something I've been really trying to push is just simply demand it. And you know what's frustrating, Kevin? I'm saying these things and it just sounds so common sense and so easy to do,
Yeah,
right?
meritocracy. That's what gets
But
it done. Yeah.
but you would amaze at the pushback, like, no, that's insane. We can't, no, no, no. Because they know they're not, there's no real results. And that's what they're terrified of. And they usually got the support of like the governor and blah, 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 who basically, can just do what they want. And this won't change until leadership changes. So, I always tell people, if you want change, vote differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Or as the saying goes, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing or more of the same thing and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we hear all the time in the media. So when you talk about the
Oh,
things that can be done to solve this, I mean, that is where you have to start.
I interviewed a homeless guy once, and I love that saying. And he helped me think differently about it because I asked him about the corrupt system. He goes, "Well, it's the definition of insanity, except when it comes to the NGOs, they do the same thing over and over again because they accept this. They expect the same result because because it's pretty brilliant."
Yeah.
Because they know it's not working, and when it doesn't work they make more money, so they don't want a different result because a different result could result in success. They
Yeah.
want the same result over and over again. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
And I was blown away when he said that. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And so this is why I love interviewing the homeless because I was surprised. These are very insightful people. They are well read. They're thinkers. I mean, when you're not like working all day and you don't have kids, and if you have just a lot of time to just hang out, you're thinking all day long, right?
Yeah.
So they're thinkers, and some really have some really incredible insight what's really going on.
And they
And not
actually
everybody on the streets are knuckleheads. There's some really good people that just kind
right.
of got in a tight spot. I try to remind people that you don't know. Like, look, I had a little brother that ended up on the streets of Portland with a meth addiction in the early 1990s. Very unexpected. He's 10 months younger than me. And when he turned 20 years old, he just was struggling with some, childhood trauma kind of stuff and just went to the streets, developed a habit. And I don't really talk about it much, but long story short is at the time he had actually stole. I don't know what it was, but he borrowed a bunch of stuff from mine that disappeared. And at the time, because when you're 20, 22, 23, stuff is important to you, right? That's what you think about. You think about, I want my car and TV and CD player, right? So I was really upset with him because he had taken from me and never given it back. And I know what it went to, right?
Yeah.
So one day out of the blue, he calls me and he was really desperate. And he's just like basically in tears saying, I really need help. And it was a defining moment because I could have very easily just hung up on the phone because I was angry. And I
Yeah.
remember this voice came into my head, right? And just said, now is not the time to be angry at your brother, right? And I
Mhm.
never forgot that voice, because the moment this voice said that, I immediately just felt this love for my brother and nothing else. All my anger went away. And I said, Jason, move in with me now, today. And he did. So long story short, he was living under a bush. He had lost 80 pounds. He had not eaten in 3 days. He was dying. And this was 30 years ago. His date of sobriety was the day he moved into my housing. He has never used since.
Wow. Oh,
He owns a home. He has a good job. He has a child. I have a nephew. He is a completely different person. But I try to remind people that it's very easy to be angry at the ones out there because of the addiction and stuff. But like, I was able at the time to forgive my brother, and I think to this day, what would have happened if I hung up the phone? Because he had no more money left, no food, and nobody was talking to him. And I truly believe if I didn't say yes, he would probably be dead. And
well, and
so him and I are very close. And I just remind people also, why do you do this? Why do you care? I'm like, well, I have like this firsthand experience, right? Uh, I also have an uncle that died of alcoholism, and my grandmother died of alcoholism, right? I have substance abuse issues in my family, and I just sort of grew up around that kind of stuff. And obviously, there was some homelessness. So I have at least a small perspective what it feels like within a family dynamic to have these things going on, and I just continue doing the work.
wow. Well, and it's an inspiring story, because I got to say, when you talked about faith-based groups, I always remember something. What you said, forgive him, and that you felt
Mhm.
filled with love for him.
Absolutely, I will never forget that feeling, and I will never forget the voice in my head, because when they answered the phone, I felt anger. I was like, "Where is my stuff?" Right?
Yeah.
And once that happened, it's just like my life changed. And I just felt nothing but love and compassion, and just like, I'm going to help my brother. I will do everything I can. Doesn't mean I was now just going to take care of him. I
Yeah,
laid down the
or
law.
excuse his behavior and just try to
I
make him
had
feel
a,
good. Right.
I lived in a small studio apartment on Hawthorne, right? I had to move into the closet. It was a tiny little thing, and it was a very small space, right? And I said, there's only two rules, right? Get clean and get healthy. Meaning, I don't expect you to work right now. That would be insane. But I need you to not use. I need you to go to AA. I need you to eat food and gain your weight back. So then, after about 3 or 4 months, and he was still sober, he finally got into Oxford housing. And then he was in Oxford housing for 3 years. He eventually got out and then worked in social services for 5 years.
Hmm.
And then he went back to school and then became a carpenter. And so he kind of gave back, did his thing, in the early 2000s, and just kind of focused on other hands-on type stuff. And so I absolutely held my brother accountable. I basically said, you don't get to do this anymore. Okay. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm here to support you. Okay. But this is not going to work. And I told him, point blank, if you do this, you are out of here, because I will not tolerate this in my small space. At the time, I was in college full time and I was working full time. I was completely overwhelmed,
Yeah.
super poor. But you know what? The funny thing is, it was like I was also completely okay with him being there, because it felt good. Like, wow, I get to help this guy, right? And he did everything he was supposed to. And so that's why, at my age now, like, I'm a big believer in empowering, not enabling. I empowered him, and he embraced it. He needed to hear that tough love talk, and it changed his life. And he's a completely different person now. He's an amazing father, provider. We play golf together. He's just like, it's like he is a completely different person. And
Well,
I
that's
share that story because, I oftentimes wonder about, this voice. Was this divine intervention? You know, I,
that's what I
I
thought
believe,
of
I
when you
believe,
said
I
that.
believe it was, because it was so powerful. And it's the first time ever, when you're angry, it takes a while to not be angry.
Yeah.
Like you like have to walk around the
Yeah,
block
you
50
gotta
times. Right?
ratchet it down and kinda, like,
So
maybe scream into the air and then come back and yeah.
so in that moment when I'm holding the phone, it like washed away immediate. And I felt this sense of peace and I knew 100%. And I just said, move in with me. I'm going to take care of you immediately. And he said, okay. And he eventually paid me back, right? And everything. And so like I just thank God that I had that happen to me where I gave him a second chance. And so I remind families, because by the way, family estrangement is extremely common, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for very justifiable reasons. These people just lie, cheated, and steal probably for years.
Yeah,
But
and
you have to forgive. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily forget right away. But no matter what, doesn't mean you have to give them money. Never stop loving them, right? Because whatever reason they're there, people need love, right? And and it's still sometimes okay to be upset, annoyed, frustrated, or angry, but you always have to have that love. That's a very important piece. Humans need connection,
yeah.
and so even
Especially
with
if
the
they
people
had
on the
trauma,
streets,
especially if they
yeah,
had trauma, and recovery is really just another way of saying redemption. I mean, it
yeah.
really is. It's not that
And
different. It's just that one is more of a clinical sounding thing, and the other is what really happens to you.
yeah,
Every
and so finding that balance, right? And if you can find that balance and realize you're actually helping them, not hurting them, and also reminding that a homeless person, they're not a protected class. You could talk to them like adults. You don't have to.
yeah, so
You don't.
it's not a big
You
safe space out there.
you don't have to tiptoe around them. Be scared about cursing, whatever. Trust me, they've been there and done that. They
Yeah,
actually appreciate if you just talk like a real person and talk to them like a friend or a brother rather than just like a clinician that's analyzing them and being very careful what to say. They hate that crap,
yeah. They don't
right?
want to be called a client. Excuse me, client. It's
No.
just they want to be a
And,
person because that's what's been missing.
and I have no problem sometimes just saying like, don't do that.
Yeah,
And even sometimes you're an idiot, right?
yeah.
And they'll call me the same thing sometimes, and it's funny because it's like, look, if you really care about a person, you're going to call them out on stuff too. You're going to be like, dude, I care about you, please, this is not working, right?
Yeah.
And so I just try to plant that seed, and I also know when to kind of keep my mouth shut and other times when to, those opportunities come up where I can share what they need to hear. But it's there's a lot of loneliness on the streets. There's a lack of connection, and I think if we saw even that more, we would see a lot of changes. But you rarely see people out there. I'm not going to name the team because then I'm going to get online hate. But it's very rare to see an outreach team in downtown Portland. But I saw one today, and there's
Yeah.
always 4 or 5 of them. They're always huddled up, almost like they're touching shoulders, right? And I was on the block, which is the highest concentrated homeless population in the entire city of Portland. And they stood at the corner for about 5 minutes and didn't really know what to do and then walked away. I'm like,
Well, you
and there
told
was
me that
like,
Portland. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish that story.
there's people on the streets, people using, screaming,
All
fighting, the
over the
stabbing
place.
just happened. Great opportunity to help these people. And they just wouldn't. And I've seen this dozens of times. And I
Yeah.
swear to you, I've never actually seen them talk to anybody. I don't know what they do.
Well, so
Please help me.
you told me once that I think you told me this that Portland Street Response. I'll just pick on them a little bit here. They're modeled after something in Eugene that I think just went under in their cahoots, and they're trying to bring it back. But Portland Street Response, they were instructed not to stand any closer than 6 feet to anybody.
That I know that's a kind of a rule in Seattle. I do see PS are out there little times, and there's always a two-person team, and they always show up in a car. Which it's great to drive there, but you shouldn't just stay in your car. You,
Yeah.
you should get out and talk, and and just you know uh, spend time with them and get to know them, and I don't really see that, and I don't want to be overly critical because I don't see much of them, but I don't really also know exactly what their role is or their goal. I think it's very important to know role and goal. Like, all right, you're paid to do this. Did you do it? Right. And,
That
and
sounds
I,
pretty straightforward.
and it's with any other in the private sector. That's what your boss is going to want from you. Right.
Yeah.
Is this is what we hired you to do. Did you do it? That's kind of the game. Right. But
Yeah.
in social services, you can kind of just like not do anything really, and it's pretty frustrating. So yeah, I know that that's kind of a rule in Seattle, and there is like strict rules. Like when a homeless person says no to you, you have to immediately disengage. And what's frustrating about that is most homeless people will say no to you anyway because they either don't trust you or because they're testing you. They're testing you because they've been screwed over many times and they just assume you don't want to help them anyway. So why try?
Yeah.
Or the mistrust. So here's the amazing thing is if they say no, I don't want help, or even F you, 9 times out of 10, if you stand your ground and just like, well, I know you don't want me to be here, but let's keep talking. 9 times out of 10, they come around and be like, all right, fine.
Around. Yeah.
This is what I need. How can you help me? I've seen many times where after 5 minutes, they're crying because they never expect. In fact, I have dozens of videos where they start by saying no. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. I really think you need help. And they just finally unload because they can't believe someone didn't walk away. But if you're an outreach worker in Multnomah County, you're generally trained to say no, you immediately disengage. And I completely disagree with that.
Well, and that's if you stay in your ground, that almost says to them, I care. And you can't make me not care. It's which has a power all to its own. I can easily see that. But I also wonder, I've always been troubled with how a lot of programs that the government puts forward that are supposed to help people, they often don't do that. And it's not limited to homelessness. There's all kinds of stuff that's even had very negative consequences for people because it's created dependency and caused them to just stop doing the right things for themselves in their lives and believing that they couldn't do anything at some point, or they were told, just don't do anything, here's a check. The government doesn't love you, and it needs a person to be that, not a nameless, faceless enemy with rules that pays you to follow those rules. And that's a big takeaway I'm getting from what you're saying here, is that that's still true. That doesn't mean the government can't do some good things, but it's very hard because that big entity doesn't love you. And you loved your brother. That's what made the difference.
Yeah, and that's why I say, I see more differences being made with volunteers. Because if you're a volunteer, you're out there because you care.
Yeah.
Because you're not making money. I'm an independent journalist. I make virtually no money doing this because I care. I do this because I'm trying to make a difference and raise awareness, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And I've always said this, in social services, the common hiring practice is this. You hire for education first, experience, and then if anything's left over, passion. That's backwards.
Yeah.
You should hire for passion first, experience second, education third. Because guess what? Just because you're educated doesn't mean you're passionate, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not passionate, you're a waste of space in that space.
Yeah,
right?
You're going to burn out and look to write abstract ideological paper studies that don't do anything.
So when I would hire people, I would look for people who would, in interviews, say like, "This is my ideas. This is what I want to do. This is what we're going to do. This is how I'm going to fix this." I want them thinking about it. I want them excited. I'm like, man, who is this person? And when you find them, you pay them as much as you can because they're the ones that are going to change the world, right?
Yeah.
But then 95% of everyone else is like, oh, I have a master's degree, therefore I'm an expert in homelessness. Of course, I've lived with my parents my entire life, and I don't even know what it feels like to go hungry or anything. And now I'm immediately placed in charge of this 5-person team doing outreach, which means you're not even working the trenches per se, because you're just telling other people what to do. Yeah. No life experience whatsoever. And that's how they do it in social services, is you have that master somehow makes you an expert. And you know what? You're not an expert. And you never will be if you don't work the trenches for at least a few years. Okay.
Yeah.
I have such a pet peeve if you're not out there doing the work for at least a few years, right? And so I'm a big believer, and while I'm a believer in education, I have a good education, right? But if you're not passionate, you're not going to make a difference. You're just not. So
Yeah.
I could care less what a person's education is. In fact, in my experience of hiring people, I was much more likely to hire someone with no education with passion than someone with a bunch of education,
Yeah.
because the passionate ones, that's someone you can then teach,
Yeah.
right?
They're interested in learning because they actually
Yeah,
want to solve the problem. Yeah.
they're obsessed with the truth, and they want to fix it. And when you find them, you hold on to them. So
Be
that's,
obsessed.
if we could,
That's a great thing. Be obsessed with the truth because
you
that
have to.
actually will get you there.
And that's kind of like little things like this that could really make a difference. But as long as the very people who are still in charge, it's not going to change, right? And all I can do and you can do is just kind of report on the truth and try to change people's minds and think differently and then vote differently. And hopefully that is the catalyst that'll finally make this big change, and we can finally restore our state once and for all and save thousands of lives. I mean, this is why, I'm so excited lately with Trump's recent homelessness
I was
executive order,
about to ask
right?
you about that. By the way, it's
And
called the Ending Crime and Disorder on America's
yeah,
Streets, but
and
it has
here
some key components.
here's what I like about it, okay? Is all this is doing is this is reallocating funds from the failed housing first model to a recovery model, okay? That's all it is. And I'm a big believer in the recovery model because 90+% of the people out on the streets are actively using drugs. And recovery is literally the first step to
Yeah.
becoming self sufficient or whatever. And that's all it really does. And it's amazing. And the fact that all these like nonprofits are pushing back saying this is the most evil, vile thing President Trump has ever done. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, if you,
To
and
the
what's this?
nonprofits, but not to
This
the
is what's
homeless.
so it's funny in a sad sort of way, is even when a good idea is in front of them, they can't stand it if the person who came with the idea is someone they hate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they have to reject it. They have to find something wrong with it. But I'm trying to educate the public that this is basically just going to be a recovery model. Now, it obviously has to be implemented the right way, and nothing is perfect. But he wants to bring back civil commitments, or at least make it easier for civil commitments, which will then help the people, naked women in the middle of the street that are being assaulted every night, that are severely mentally ill. So this is all this is doing. And so keep hating Trump as much as you want, to my nonprofit friends. This is going to end up, this will end up saving thousands of lives. And that's the most important takeaway from this, right? Is
Yeah.
this is a bold, the most bold, mind you, executive order on homelessness in history. Now, the last big bold move that was a spectacular failure was when President Obama signed the Housing First bill in 2013,
Yeah.
where he famously said, "We will end homelessness in 10 years." So that ended in 2004 or 24. Okay.
Well, you and I actually did. If that was 2000, you and I did an interview in 2023 talking about how
Yep.
let's see if this solves it in 10 years.
So we significant increase in homelessness, addiction, crime. I knew this then, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" When he signed this away, it was multi-billions of dollars, multi.
A lot of money. Yeah.
So what I tell my friends with ideological differences is, look, we tried your way. It didn't work. Can we at least agree to try something different? It's not, ha ha, let's try our way now. No, this is serious work, and keep politics out of it. Let's just try the recovery model and see if it works. I'm confident it will. That's all I'm saying, right? I mean, losing sucks. I wanted housing first to work because if it ended homelessness, great, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I knew it probably wouldn't because there was no accountability attached to it and no buy-in from the homeless person. And I knew homeless people. I'm thinking there's just no way this is going to work. But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean I wasn't hoping it would work. But it didn't work, folks. So let's try, let's adopt this new order and just see how it goes. But I personally believe if we do it right and actually take this seriously and implement it, it's going to be the one major pivot in the history of homelessness in the United States, and it's going to change everything if we do this right. It is bold, and it's something I'm very excited about.
It says one in section 4, it says redirecting federal resources towards effective methods of addressing homelessness. It
That means
suddenly sets the
yeah.
standard of the word effective, which is missing.
Yeah, exactly. And basically what they're saying is that we are going to demand and expect measurable results, right?
Hmm.
That is really what effective is. And by the way, that's a very dirty world to social services. But I'm like, look, these are people's lives at stake, and it should be all okay to openly admit something's working or not working. And if it's not working, just try something different. That's all it is. It's not personal. We're not personally attacking you. We're just saying
Yeah.
your model is flawed. That's all it is.
It's
right?
not like he just cut off the funding and said, we're done with this. He said, redirect it to something effective.
Yeah.
And the other thing, section 5 said, increasing accountability and safety in America's homeless. Accountability. It's appalling that a grant would actually forbid accountability. And that is going to have to end if this gets
Yeah. And, I've kind of heard it through the grapevine. There's a lot of nonprofits that are going to find every way to disrupt this. Right. And it's so sad when you think about how this can actually really make potentially a real difference. And shouldn't we at least embrace this and try? Right. And, and so I'm cautiously optimistic this will work. But I mean, it really kind of comes down to executive order or not, people are stubborn.
They're going to
And when people are stubborn, they're going to find a way to disrupt, delay, slow down, stop. They're always find a way. I mean, this is people. So let's just see.
Well, and the DEI stuff that's been going on, there were the executive orders about that. And the very first thing that happened within like weeks of the executive orders, people started changing the name of their department and making it harder to figure out what it was because they knew that they'd get defunded. That's going to happen here too with something, right? So Housing First is going to start disappearing from the descriptions of different groups that depend on federal money. Am I calling that one right?
Yeah. And look, I mean, the biggest flaw in Housing First by far is one of the main components, which is voluntary personalized services. And by the way, Housing First is more so than principle, it's a philosophy. And voluntary personalized services basically means, translation is that we will have no expectations of you to work on anything that led you to the streets or kept you on the streets once you're in housing. So you won't have to do counseling, work on your recovery, your sobriety, getting a job, going to your doctor's appointment, calling your family, whatever, just a million things, getting your ID. None of that is required. Now, the philosophy behind Housing First is once the person has their basic needs met, they're more likely to come around, right? And that makes sense on paper, but again, that's an example of all theory and no practice. Because in practice, when you look at what a typical homeless person is in the middle of their addiction, they lack critical thinking and rational thought. Do you really think they're going to miraculously out of the blue being like, I want to make these kind of changes? No. Now, I'm not also saying I'm demanding that they be 100% sober moving into housing because that's also kind of unrealistic, right? But what they should do is there needs to be some kind of buy-in and some kind of agreement that they will work on their barriers. That is part of the deal, right?
Yeah.
And without that, it just becomes this basically a state-sponsored rent for life for literally no reason.
To keep doing drugs.
Yeah. And
so you don't feel like it anymore.
What I've always said about the Housing First model is it doesn't solve the problem, it hides the problem.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, I've seen Housing First apartments go up in certain neighborhoods. And once they're open, like within 2 weeks, the neighborhood is like, whoa, wow, great job. Right. And then you wait about 2 more weeks. All of a sudden, everything goes to hell again because the windows start breaking and they come back out. And then it becomes this terrible thing.
Bikes are getting stolen in the neighborhood. And
so because inside these Housing First apartments are just completely chaotic. And it's
Yeah.
important to know that I've worked in these things. I know what it's like in there. Prostitutes coming and going, drug dealers knocking on your door, violent fights, never go into the bathrooms. I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
sketch, scary. Like you'd rather be in prison. And it's really scary because some people who are in housing first programs are like, I want help. I want to get clean. I'm like, oh God, you feel bad for them
Yeah,
because of
they're
what they have to
surrounded
go
by,
through.
like, chaos. Yeah,
And
anarchy.
so, because there's so many people in the streets that really do want help, and it's like it's sad and harsh when I realize where they're going. I'm like, man, there's no way they're going to succeed,
Well, so
right?
the critics are going to say that it's heartless and cruel and all that stuff. And I just saw a few weeks ago a story, a California city, which is San Jose in Northern California, obviously has a big problem with this too. They have decided to make it a city policy that the homeless are eligible for arrest if they refuse 3 offers of shelter. Now, I don't think it's enough to just get them into shelter, but there are cities that feel like they are in desperate straits now. Like they have to do something because people have totally had it. But where's the balance you strike here? Because just leaving somebody on the street, you just said it. One of these housing first facilities, it's almost better that they be in jail. Well, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing compassionate with allowing a person to be on the streets. And as far as San Jose goes, 3 attempts, that's pretty generous, right? Because they're never going to say yes their first attempt. And honestly, I appreciate 3 attempts. I've always said this, you should make every attempt without going to extreme measures because you don't know what's really going on with them. They could mistrust the system, they could hate shelters, they could have severe anxiety. There's a lot of reasons, but 3 attempts seems fair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's nice. How could that be heartless that you're trying desperately to get the person off the streets? And here's the reality: about half the homeless population chooses to live outdoors. They consider a lifestyle. They don't want to be in housing. They
Yeah,
would probably not accept it. Now that's a problem because that means no matter what, they're going to say no. And so when you enforce, 9 times out of 10, they're either just going to, stand their ground or they're just going to move to another community. Okay.
yeah,
I've always believed what I call a community compromise is sanctioned camping, a place that is technically outdoors, large piece of land, either tiny homes or tents or RVs, but that's the only place they get to be. And then the agreement is over a 2 year plus period, they have to work on things to work towards self sufficiency. So you still kind of get to be outdoors, but not on our sidewalks, not in our parks, because how else are we going to deal with that other 40, 50% that are on the streets who are literally not interested in anything?
yeah,
And enforcement can be somewhat effective, but it's also kind of whack a mole, across the street, across the street, across the street, right?
yeah. They just
And
move
so
around.
it's not a perfect solution. I mean, the fact is, housing doesn't end homelessness because half the homeless population don't choose housing. They don't
Yeah.
want it.
And
So,
they'll and people say, well, where do you get that figure? And of course, you've just observed it by talking to people.
I mean, I have hundreds of interviews where it's just like, they're like, no, I'm nowhere near ready. I never will be. I like the lifestyle. I like being taken care of. At least in the major cities I've been to, it's generally speaking around 40 plus percent, usually kind of higher. It's interesting. Another statistic is about 30% almost population have housing, but choose to live outdoors. So they actually have apartments to go to, shelters, family, whatever, but they still like the homeless lifestyle.
Hmm.
So you see them on the sidewalks and you just assume they're homeless, but they're not. They actually have a place to go, but this is all
Interesting.
they know. And a lot of them are actually clients of Housing First model where they get placed into a small studio apartment with a bathroom down the hallway. And all it takes is 1 or 2 days to be like, I'm isolated, I'm depressed, I'm alone. So they go to the streets where they know their family and all the, all that good feelings they had because it's not like these Housing First programs are like, healthy. It's
Yeah.
depressing, really. It's dark and drama, and there's not really any day programs where you're playing basketball and taking classes and good stuff like that. Like the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, they do good work. They're really big on gardening, and you have to take self improvement classes, and you have to volunteer. So that's like they're very much like we're going to introduce you back to the community.
Yeah.
But Housing First doesn't do that. So you see, that's the biggest challenge we have is housing doesn't end homelessness. It'll only end it for just a little over half the population. And then what? And that's the big question.
And recovery could end it for everybody that's doing drugs.
Sure. I mean, we need a recovery based model because even the ones that say no, if they were to recover, they might have a change, they might change their minds. So it just kind of depends. I mean, like even with the stubborn ones, you work with them long enough, you're going to be able to wear 50% of them down to probably finally accept help.
Yeah, instead of having them wear the communities down that they're in, which those communities are starting to get pretty short-tempered with them, to be honest.
So, I mean, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. One of my biggest pet peeves is anytime you hear new funding for chronic homeless, it's important you remember the word chronic. A chronic homeless person is different than a regular homeless person. And why do they use chronic? Because chronic are the ones that have been on the streets the longest and have zero interest in leaving the streets.
Yeah.
So my question is, why not put that funding towards the 25, 30% that are desperate to get off the streets because they got screwed over by their husband or wife, divorce, job, medical. They really, really, really need help. Why are we focusing our energy on someone who doesn't even want off the streets? And the reason why they do that, I think, is because it doesn't really solve the problem. And it's good money because when you think chronic, you think, oh, that must be the most extreme. They're the most acute. Yes, technically speaking, they are, but they also have zero interest in help 9 times out of 10.
It's a forever government program
you should always help the low-hanging fruit first.
Absolutely.
Help the people motivated for change today. And I need people to know that not everyone on the streets is lazy. There's a lot of good people out there who just got in a tight spot, right? Maybe made poor decisions, had some medical issues, got a divorce, gambled, addiction. Things happen, and they need help, and they need help now. And it's so heartbreaking that they're not getting the help because all this money is going towards not only the chronic population, but also like the BIPOC population, right? And by the way, don't get me started. I could talk an hour for this. I do not support prioritizing funds towards BIPOC if you're homeless. It should be specific to a person ready for change. I could care less what they look like, what the color of skin, and whether they're wearing a dress or not, right? Male or female. If they are ready for change, that is the only criteria. That is who we help first. There should be no other when it comes to homelessness.
Yeah.
Right. And honestly, it just feels a little racist when you're prioritizing one person over another, especially if this person is more ready than this person.
Yeah, because it assigns a value to a person based on immutable attributes or lifestyle, which has nothing to do with being the low-hanging fruit ready to stop using drugs and get back to life, right?
Exactly.
Well, so I want to make sure that folks can follow you and find out about what you're doing, and in particular, if they would be willing to, if they could support what you're doing, because obviously you said you're doing it with your heart. It still costs money, and it's a livelihood that you're pursuing. It's a vocation, and I know. Okay, so your it's x.com/Kevin V. Dahlgren. Got to have the V in there because you'll get some weird thing. And then your Substack is truthonthestreets.substack.com. Truthonthestreets.substack.com. And it looks like they can subscribe there. Is that the main way that they can actually support what you're doing?
Yeah, that's where I'm asking people to support my work. It's where I'm able to write longer form work. As much as I like doing social media sites like X and Instagram, there's limitations, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Substack allows me to do video and photos and write in the long form to really talk about the system in a very concise way. And if people think I'm worth it, they can subscribe either for free or for $12 a month, which of course is greatly appreciated because I do this work for free. And the more support I have, the more work I can do, because I also really want to travel and go to other communities and learn about the systems there, which I've already done. In 2013, I went to 11 different major cities, right? So I have done a lot of traveling, but I want to continue to do so. So that's a great way to support me, is just, that $12 a month would mean the world to me on my Substack. And of course, on my social medias, there's other things like Buy Me Coffee
I
or
just
even
I just
Venmo
saw
or
that up
Cash
here.
App,
Yep.
which is generous, and I appreciate that. So that's great too. But just any support is greatly, greatly appreciated.
So yes, that last one that you mentioned is buymeacoffee.com/the streets. Buy me a
Yes.
Yep. And
And it's like $5, $10. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it goes to coffee.
yeah, yeah, because
Because,
coffee's expensive,
well,
and especially in Portland.
so like I'm on the streets at 7 a.m. and it's like chaos. I'm definitely like chugging down caffeine,
Yeah,
just holding my sanity as I'm filming, and it's chaotic. And I just saw this, like the stabbing I saw today, and it's just like sometimes I just need my coffee.
yeah, yeah. So get them a coffee, folks, at a very
Thank
minimum.
you.
But Kevin, thank you for taking the time. We went quite a bit longer than we normally would, but obviously this is like fantastic show. Really, your knowledge of this is beyond almost anybody I've come across, and I know you know some of the other folks that are really good and knowledgeable on this. But it is also essential. Like I think that when you changed your mind and changed how you felt and helped your brother, you learned something about yourself, and you are
Mm.
still doing it out there, my friend. You're still doing it.
Well, I appreciate that, brother.
You got it. And again, thanks for joining me here tonight. I hope it's not 2 years before we do another one, but I do think that there's a lot that we may see happen in the next year or two, especially with what you mentioned about the Trump executive order. It would be great to do progress reports instead of just talk about how it stayed the same for two
Well,
years.
big things are happening. Fingers crossed, it's actually going to do something. I mean, you know, we Trump did the right order, so we'll see if it's implemented the right way. And if that happens, this could really change everything, and really, we could end this addiction crisis, which will then end up ending this homeless crisis once and for all.
Be fantastic. Great
I'm
message for tonight.
excited.
Me too. All right. Well, take care of yourself. Stay safe. And folks, make sure that you go to the Substack, buy me a coffee and x.com and check out Kevin Dahlgren and support him. We'd really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
thanks everyone for watching us here tonight. Share this with everyone you can. You're going to have somebody who tells you that 90% of the things we just talked about here today are the opposite of what we said. Give them an opportunity to learn and to hear this and to hear it from somebody who really knows, like Kevin Dahlgren, because we need to change a lot of minds in order to make this work and get everybody on the same page and maybe make this problem something that we talk about was the years past, way in the past. So thank you. Thanks, Kevin. We'll see you on future captive audience. And thanks everyone for watching here tonight. We'll see you.